Can a photograph reveal trauma? A photograph captures a fraction of a second, but sometimes that fraction feels heavier than an entire lifetime. We've all experienced it. That strange moment when looking at an image of someone and sensing something unspoken beneath the surface. Not sadness exactly, not fear, something deeper, a tension hidden in posture, an absence in the eyes, a silence that seems to leak through the frame itself. So the question becomes unsettling. Can a photograph actually reveal trauma? Or are we simply projecting emotion onto frozen light? Today, we explore how body language, fragmentation, and visual psychology transform certain photographs into emotional documents, not of what happened, but of what remains afterward. The body speaks before words. Trauma rarely announces itself clearly. More often, it hides in the body long before it reaches language. The shoulders collapse inward, hands become defensive, eye contact disappears, movement changes, presence changes. Psychologists have long observed that emotional distress reshapes physical behavior. And photography, intentionally or not, records those behaviors with ruthless precision. A portrait may appear ordinary at first glance, but then something feels off. The body leans away from the camera. The jaw is tense. The smile arrives too late. The eyes look somewhere else entirely. These tiny fractures in physical expression create emotional dissonance. The image stops feeling posed and begins feeling exposed. Not because trauma is visible like a scar, but because the body often carries emotional memory in subtle, involuntary ways. A camera can capture that tension even when the subject is trying to hide it. Fragmentation and the broken self. One of the most powerful visual languages associated with trauma is fragmentation. Faces obscured by shadow, cropped bodies, blurred movement, reflections broken by mirrors or windows. Photographs where the subject appears incomplete, partially erased, are psychologically distant from their surroundings. Why do these images feel so emotionally charged? Because trauma itself often disrupts continuity. Memory fragments, identity fragments, time fragments. Many photographers instinctively use visual disruption to represent emotional rupture. The image becomes less about documentation and more about psychological atmosphere. A blurred portrait can feel more truthful than a perfectly sharp one. Not because it shows reality more accurately, but because it mimics how trauma alters perception itself. The world no longer feels stable, so the image stops being stable too. The power of absence. Sometimes trauma appears not through what is visible, but through what is missing. An empty chair, an untouched bed, a figure isolated in negative space, a room that feels abandoned even while occupied. Absence carries emotional weight because the human mind constantly searches images for connection and meaning. When something expected is missing, the photograph becomes psychologically active. The viewer begins filling the silence themselves. This is why certain minimalist photographs feel devastating without showing anything explicitly painful. The emptiness becomes the subject. In visual psychology, isolation within a frame often triggers emotional interpretation. Large empty spaces surrounding a figure can evoke vulnerability, alienation, or emotional detachment. The photograph never says the word trauma, but the composition whispers it. The ethics of looking. But there is another layer to this conversation. If photography can reveal emotional pain, what does that mean for the act of looking? There is a thin line between witnessing vulnerability and consuming it aesthetically. Modern culture often romanticizes emotional suffering through cinematic sadness, melancholic portraiture, and curated vulnerability online. Sometimes an image documenting pain becomes transformed into visual style, and that creates an uncomfortable question. Are we empathizing with trauma, or aestheticizing it? The camera can illuminate emotional truth, but it can also turn private suffering into spectacle. This tension has haunted photography since its invention. Conclusion. What the camera really captures. Perhaps a photograph cannot fully reveal trauma. Not directly. A camera cannot record memory, fear, grief, or psychological damage itself. It captures surfaces, light, gesture, stillness, and yet, humans are experts at reading emotional residue from surfaces. We recognize tension, withdrawal, fragility, distance, so maybe trauma in photography exists not as evidence, but as echo. A subtle disturbance in body language, a fracture in composition, a silence inside the frame that feels too heavy to ignore. And sometimes, those quiet visual echoes tell us more about the human condition than any clear explanation ever could.